the real cross section of our city, the real place where we can get into every nook and cranny and backdoor it is through the marketplace. And I think if we can cast vision for and also model out for people what it looks like to say, there's nothing special about this missionary lifestyle. There's nothing special about this disciple making thing. It's just normal. There's also a strategic way of saying, let's go after whoever God gives us opportunities for, and then let's follow that fruit and train it as it goes and see if it takes us into gaps that we didn't expect. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the H3X Podcast with your hosts, Mark Gearing and Dave Miller. Mark hanging out in New York City and Dave hanging out in the back of a dry cleaner. So you know which one of us is probably the one you should listen to most. Mark.
Depends on the topic. And today, we'll see.
Yeah, today we'll see. So Mark knows, and we've talked about it, but we just made a significant transition in terms of our CFC with my family, my wife, my children, where we had been really highly focused in on unreached peoples in Oklahoma City. And we're starting to see a little traction, momentum, and some leaders that were raised up in that and have flourished out of Oklahoma City. And so the Lord put it on our hearts to kind of drop back a little bit and go into what we're calling a live, work, play, which is just basically the 20-yard line instead of the 80-yard line as far as focus. And we didn't really know what to expect, but we just established a rhythm and decided we were going to do 10 to 12 on Sunday mornings. And our family launched a new work that we hope turning into a church. And then we began to pray and meet as a family and inviting just people in our own live, work, play into that. And through that process, God has just opened up quite a few doors. And we're pretty excited about what God is opening, where we're going, and some opportunities that are coming down the pike. And so Mark said, hey, why don't we just chat a little bit about where that live, work, play has gone? And so I'll let you ask me some questions that might be useful, and then we'll go from there, Mark.
Well, I'll just make a couple statements to start out with, because for those who don't know Dave as well, or maybe you're just hearing him introduce this topic, this is not just an idea you're throwing around of like, well, maybe we should just focus on that next. Now, this has been what you've been living out. So you just mentioned, hey, you're coming on this podcast from the back room at Tide. I mean, this is what you do. And so in approaching this focus of live, work, and play and calling others to it, you're giving away the thing that you're doing. You're calling people into it. You're modeling it. And so I'm excited to dive in and talk about this. But that would be just my first observation is Dave is living this out, doing this. And so you've got a lot of experience and even through trial and error, some things working, some things not working. How do those things go together? And how can you mobilize the majority of the kingdom, which is most people are going to be in that live, work, play segment. So, but you're doing it. So,
yeah.
Can you talk about just what is that looking like practically as you're getting started into that?
Well, two reasons we made the shift, and both of them were where the Lord said, okay, now's the time. But we've been thinking for a while that we always are constantly doing outreach through, we've got customers, we've got vendors, we've got employees that are in the business that we're doing. And I'm, spending anywhere from 20 to 70 hours a week, depending upon the week inside the business. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make use of my time. And so instead of dividing my world between I've got work, I've got ministry, I got family, I'm just trying to figure out a way to put Jesus over all of those things, and then saying, how can I be used as a disciple maker at all times and in all places? Because as long as people are breathing, there's a place for the gospel. And so we also have always had that as kind of our core entry ever since we've been in Oklahoma City, has been the business, has been the core platform that we've been using. The second piece that really led into that, though, is that we're in a season of life, Mark, where I've got all five of my kids are up over the age of 12. I've got a gymnast, I've got a clarinet player, I've got a basketball player, I've got another basketball player, I've got another one that's got a girlfriend and has got work all the time. I've got another one that's 20 years old and is trying to kick off a voice acting career. And there's just a lot of things in our lives that are requiring a lot of our time, family-wise. And so then we dropped back and said, okay, how can we stop pitting these two against each other, and let's use this season that we're in as a way for us to connect in the gospel. And so we look at the basketball, the gymnastics, the clarinet, all those kind of things. I'm going to be working concessions. I'm going to be working gates. I'm going to be going to basketball games. I'm going to be, volunteering with my wife for meets, all those kind of things. There's people, they're breathing. And so then we said, how can we make that focus? And the Lord gave us the okay to go ahead and say, let's start another church and launch off of that. So the two things were, it's our main entry, but also the season of life is dictating that we really don't have the time to say we're going to give another CFC outside of our normal family rhythms of life. And so we need to make use of that, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it makes sense. So it's something that you're living out, and this focus of live, working, and playing, that it's a part of just where your family's at. But what I like about what you're saying, and you kind of just touched on it real briefly, but that when you're at the concession stand or you're in these different areas that you already are in, what you just kind of alluded to is that that's the mission field, and that's the way that the average person who might come to a normal Sunday model church and they're giving towards missions, but then they go back to their job during the rest of the week, they resonate with that. What do they need to hear about that way of thinking about being on mission throughout the week?
Well, what I found is, and it's just reality, the greatest cross-section of the diversity of our cities is going to be the workplace, because everybody has to have a job. And so let's say, for instance, we want to go after people who are from the country of Morocco and speak Arabic in our city, and we're having a hard time connecting with them. But we've got people who are believers who are coworkers, and one of their engineering coworkers is an Arabic-speaking Moroccan. We've already got inroads, because no matter who you are, where you're from, why you're here, you've got to get a job in order to live, and to work and play that's just life. And so the real cross section of our city, the real place where we can get into every nook and cranny and backdoor it, is through the marketplace. And I think if we can cast vision for and also model out for people what it looks like to say, there's nothing special about this missionary lifestyle. There's nothing special about this disciple making thing. It's just normal. And you can do it exactly where you are, and then follow the fruit as God provides it. Then you'll see the kingdom go down the lines of relationship, because ultimately, I think the way in which God moves is always going to be through people, because that's what he's about. And so every single way in which the gospel is going to spread is going to be person to person to person. So the question then becomes, strategically, you can decide specifically who the people are going to be, and then you can go and you work for that. And that makes sense, because there's a gap, there's a place that needs to be done. There's also a strategic way of saying, let's go after whoever God gives us opportunities for, and then let's follow that fruit and train it as it goes and see if it takes us into gaps that we didn't expect. So we're trying to demonstrate a both and approach now in Oklahoma City, where we have specific UPG targets, but we've also got, let's just go after everybody and see where the fruit goes, if that makes sense. And it's going to allow us, I pray and hope, and God is already opening up some doors for us to train people who are already in these shoes and looking for next steps on how to be good disciple makers, even in their marketplace.
Yeah, so you bring in that piece of next steps. And so we could talk about methods or tools, but maybe more important is process, because I think when you think about this group of people who's in live, work, and play, which is the majority of us, the big question is, how do you do that? What's that process look like? And so we have this acronym we use a lot: model, assist, watch, launch, or MALL. Can you speak to that, Dave? What does MALL look like in live, work, and play, where you're opening up these different parts of your life to see that process unfold where you already are?
Well, for our family, the strategic thing is, one is we've established this Bible study on Sunday mornings. And so if anybody has a question about, well, what does church look like? How do you do church? Or they don't have a church, we've got that environment where we can put them into a model, and they can watch what we're doing. They can live it out with us. And then if they want to join up with us, they can learn through that. So we have this environment where our family is doing church, and we're inviting people into that process with us, some long-term, some short-term. The second place is that learning how to just simply speak the gospel with everyday relationships with coworkers and those people that you're around on a normal basis. And so the simple modeling of how do I share my 15-second story, or how do I share the 3 circles just with those people that are around me. And then, I'm an employer. And so I've got employees, and a lot of the guys that are working for me are people who are working for me, and they've asked or been open to a mentoring relationship. I'm not forcing it on them, but they're saying, hey, Dave, we want to learn leadership. We want to learn ministry. We want to learn those things for you. And so we're creating environments to where we have kind of monthly focus about, hey, here's the things we're going to talk about this month. Here's the skills that we're going to work on. So we spend time with our head, heart, and hands, where I've got some values and some skills that I'm putting an emphasis on each month. And it's just my way of trying to invest into the people that are around me, and just creating opportunities to teach and to train, just in as you're going down the road. So Deuteronomy 6 really, Mark, is really a core passage for the way in which we're approaching this season of life. And that is, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, he is one. You're to love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he goes on to say that we're supposed to teach this to our children as we're walking down the road, as we get up, as we lie down. And the idea is that it is discipleship as we're going, as a way of life, with every opportunity that's presented us. Some of those are going to be created, like scheduled, structured, but the vast majority of those are just going to be as we're going, and they find us rather than us creating them, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think that's really helpful, Dave, the way, first of all, you've modeled that. So you even just like saying, hey, this is something I've been doing, and opening up your business and making space for that modeling and assisting to happening. We sometimes will use that phrase of withness, not witness, but withness.
Right.
Where having those disciples with you and alongside, and I can't think of a better area or target of focus than live, work, play for withness. Because you're spending time with the people that you want to reach everywhere you go, whether it's your kid's soccer game or alongside in the workplace, whatever it is. So I think that's a key piece of it. So,
well, and my real core focus is that we're going to be taking for those of you who are familiar with the 411, we're going to take that oikos, or that relationship map, and we're going to literally divide it into, here I am in the center with God's heart, and what is your live, work, and play, so that we can start praying for where these people already are. And so in a lot of ways, in our conversations, Mark, especially on this podcast, we'll jump ahead to people who are strategically trying to bridge gaps. But I'm intentionally going to drop back to like the 10-yard line, and I'm going to say to people, I'm not asking you to do anything different in your life. I'm not actually asking you to even change probably most of your daily rhythms in those areas. I'm just asking you to learn how to strategically and intentionally think about what can God do through me and the things I'm already doing, and trying to get people in their mindsets to start seeing their life as a strategic kingdom moment every single moment of the day, rather than trying to think about it as like evangelism has to be scheduled at 2 hours on Tuesday night. No, it can be, how can I just share my gospel, the gospel of Jesus in everyday life and everyday moments, and learning to leverage those so that we don't have to think that disciple making is something extra. Right. It just becomes an intentional use of the already.
Yeah. I think you hit on one of the last questions I wanted to ask you on this, but so maybe you can dive into it a little bit more. But when we talk about this stuff, Dave, usually when there are barriers to seeing the Great Commission happen, we'll use this language of, it's not usually out there, external, something that's keeping me. It's usually between the ears. It's usually in our mindset that those barriers exist. And for us to get in the game and begin to do this, usually it's about shining light on that barrier that's keeping us from really what the Bible or theology calls the priesthood of the believer. For us, like getting in the game and doing it, you highlighted that one of saying, hey, I'm not asking you to add anything else to your day. It's learning how to see these areas of your life you're already in. Do you think there are any other barriers or challenges between the ears that somebody who might be in a live, work, play focus, they need to hear that they can do this stuff?
The number one barrier I've already heard for some opportunities that the Lord has provided through relationships for us to get into more marketplaces besides just our own, and to start to train and impact and influence people on how to do this. The number one barrier, hands down, that I've heard repetitively is, are you allowed to talk about the gospel at work? our culture, especially in the United States or Western culture, has taught us that we're supposed to somehow take faith and business or politics or any type of public life. Take your pick. But faith is personal, everything else is public, and you're not supposed to take the personal faith into the public life. And the truth of the matter is that the way I've responded to most people is if the time that you take for a personal faith never makes it out to the public, then the time that you're using for that kind of a faith is really a waste of time. Because our faith ought to be the very core foundational convictional reasons why we think, live, and do. Our head, heart, and hands ought to be driven by what we believe, what our faith does. And so I see that big barrier where they're really afraid to say, I didn't know I could share the gospel at work, or I didn't know that I could talk to a coworker about these things. And I do understand that there's a witty, kind, compassionate, smart way to do it, right? We are supposed to be as innocent as doves, but we're supposed to be wise as serpents, right? And so there are right ways that can do it, and there's different ways that, may not do it. But that's the fear, Mark, is I'm supposed to be quiet. And I just don't think that Jesus teaches us quietness. I don't think he teaches us rudeness. He doesn't teach us arrogance. He teaches us servant humility. But he definitely doesn't teach silence. And so I think we've got to be open with the gospel, and that's probably the biggest barrier I run into.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I wonder, because I know there will be those that will hear this, because a lot of the time when we talk about a podcast or topics of reaching unreached people groups or the mission, it can be almost delegated out or given just over to these certain people or missionary or whatever. But there's going to be people that are hearing this that they say they're going to feel provoked to do this, and maybe even for the first time. What do they need to hear about what to do next or how to get started in this?
Yeah, I think the main thing is, honestly, Mark, is to really go back and ask two big questions. And what is the core of me as a follower of Jesus? What am I supposed to be? And I think the book of Ephesians is probably one of the best books for us to understand and know, because I think if I was to boil down Ephesians into two big ideas, it would be to know Christ and to make him known. We see that come out of that book often, right? And to know him and make him known. And I think a lot of times, people think about to know him, and they think about church as me knowing Christ, and it's very me centered. It's about my life, my character. All those things are good, but to make him known is the natural byproduct of those things. And so that core identity that I am one who knows Christ and I'm to make him known. And then the second thing is, I would say, just the simple act of taking someone where you live, anywhere where you're spending your own neighborhood, where you work, and then where you play, hobbies. In our case, it's not where my wife and I play, it's where our children are playing, and we're just participating in our children's activities. But to grab 3 names from each of those different areas of your life, and to start by simply praying for them. And if you don't know how to pray for them, you can just pick up the Lord's Prayer and just begin to say out of Matthew 6, we want to see heaven come to earth in the lives of these people, and just mimic the Lord's Prayer and begin to pray that over at least 9 names, and then ask the Lord to provide those opportunities. And I think that he will, if you'll be faithful to move towards those things.
Praise God. It's really good. Well, as we end this out, I mean, I don't know if you have any specific passages that come to your mind, but this is not your idea, right, Dave? This is not just, hey, let's focus on this live, work, play focus, but this is woven throughout the New Testament. So you read the book of Acts. Even we got to talk with a friend of ours who wrote a book on this recently. But the church, as it expands and goes about the mission, God has this new temple that's formed through his people, and wherever they go is where the mission begins to go. So this is not just Dave's idea that he's coming up with this, hey, let's do this live, work, play focus. This is God's strategy. Could you speak to that or any other passages that come to mind, Dave, for where we see this in the New Testament?
Well, I'll say, obviously, because I'm in the workplace, and the Lord moved us into business, the understanding of Paul as a tent maker was very foundational to us, and the reason that we made the transition 10 years ago to start this lifestyle out of vocational ministry into a franchise business, and then trying to do ministry for free. And it really came back to Mark, where Paul said, I didn't covet anyone's silver or gold, but I set an example for you that if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. And knowing that in the New Testament, there's this foundational piece and understanding that work is core to who we are as human beings. I think it goes all the way back to the book of Genesis, where we're taking dominion, that the actual pattern of work. But the real reality of it is, when we read the New Testament, the question becomes, if you look at Paul and you think about Paul, what was Paul doing when we aren't getting the snippets of him sharing the gospel? And he is traveling and he's walking. He has to eat. He has to travel. He has to ride a ship. There's certain things that we have to do. And then the big question I always ask people is this: in the first 30 years of Jesus's life, what was he doing?
Right.
Like, we don't know anything except for 12 to when he starts his ministry, but he was doing things. And then the question becomes, does that mean that from 12 to 30 that Jesus was wasting his life? And the answer is clearly not.
Yeah.
Right? Clearly not. He was making use of the time where he was and what he was doing. And so what I want to really just kind of push back on and look at is to say, when they were meeting house to house, let's say in Acts chapter 2, and they were having dinner and sharing meals together in their homes, we're seeing a pattern of ministry is happening right where people are living.
Yeah.
Right? Whenever we see people come to Christ, Lydia and the jailer, for instance, Paul goes back to where they were living. The reason that Paul even met the jailer is because he was at work, right?
Yeah.
There's so many examples of how this works. And I think the reason it's so helpful and strategic, Mark, is because it's total common sense. When I go, as an example, to unreached people or a gap, and let's say someone comes to Christ, when I see that person come to Christ in an area where the gospel's never been before, let's say they're an international, even in the United States, what are they doing? They're living, they're working, and if they have time, they're playing.
Right.
Well, if they're going to then move on and reach their own people and become an indigenous leader, how are they going to make those connections? And the answer is they're going to have to begin to become intentional with their live, work, and play.
Right.
So the reason it really resonates with me well is because the way in which we reach people is we might step out of our normal live, work, play to go engage, but we're going to engage a live, work, play somewhere. That is the fabric of life. And that is where the gospel has to be embedded. And those are the relational connections that the gospel has to spread through in order for movement to ever take place. And so you might see someone who comes to Christ in live, work, play, mature, grow, gain fruit, gain in leadership, and then God may call them out of their live, work, play. But in order for them to go somewhere else, they're going to have to go to somebody else's live, work, play to reach them. And so it really is the foundational structure, bedrock by which the gospel is going to move forward, no matter what. Because what we're after is a sustained gospel movement within a group of people's live, work, and play, if that makes sense.
As we land this, how can somebody get connected with you and experience that?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody wanted to meet with us personally in Oklahoma City, you guys can connect with us. Dave@synergy.us is a good place to email me, and I'll give you the details of when we're meeting on Sunday mornings from 10 to noon. You're welcome to join in if you're in the area or you want to stop in, you want to see that. If you ever wanted to come and spend a day with me at my business and you guys wanted to come to Oklahoma City and say, hey, Dave, can I come and shadow you for 2 or 3 days? Then, I mean, I've got an open invitation to say, hey, you guys come and do that. We also have these podcasts that we're doing, but Mark, your website, Multiplying Disciples in Churches, and then my website at synergy.us. There's plenty of information I'm writing on that. I'm also doing some H3X lives, and I'm putting the content that we're using on those up on synergy.us for you to access and see some of the materials and the things that we're using. But there's plenty of places. The answer is just send me an email or reach out to us, and I'll find a way to connect with you if you'd be interested in knowing how to do this better.
Amen. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for listening, for watching. If this content has been helpful for you, please take a minute to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us to get this content out there farther, to serve Jesus, grow his kingdom, and accomplish the Great Commission until there is no place left. Much love to you guys. See you next time.